What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with Scoop Duck on 3, coming to you live on a Monday morning, September 16th, 2024. It's week 4, and the Oregon Ducks are on a bye following a 49-14 win over the Oregon State Beavers, but we are still back with our weekly Monday mailbag, talking all things Oregon football and recruiting. And I got a little bit of a new face on the Monday mailbag. It's usually Travis Rookley, but he had some complications, should I say, just kind of busy schedule. So the show goes on, and I am joined by Scoop Duck owner and publisher Justin Hopkins. How are we doing, Justin? Good morning.
Pretty good. It's Monday. It feels kind of weird because it's Monday, and we don't have a press conference later today, and the Ducks blew out Oregon State, and everybody's excited about it. And but here we are. I feel like I have a case of the Mondays. I had a tough time getting going this morning for sure.
Yeah, it's a little tough getting going sometimes. I was able to get myself into the gym, so that's kind of a good way to start the week. I got my second cup of coffee here just off to the side, so I'm ready to get the day going and just talk some Duck football like we kind of always do. If this is your first time tuning into us, you guys, you can usually find Justin and I live here on YouTube at Scoop Duck on 3 or on our Twitter and X accounts at MTOR Sports, at JHopkinsSD, usually between the hours of 10 and 11. This is kind of our sweet spot on the West Coast. So that's Pacific Standard Time, I believe. So if you guys want to tune in and talk Duck football, we try to do this about 5 days a week, and then we hit the reaction show on Sunday to talk about Oregon's latest game. So it's a fun time, and we're glad to have you guys here. So what we're going to do on today's episode is answer some Oregon football mailbag questions. We compiled these from our subscribers over at Scoop Duck. I always post that thread, and you guys can ask questions. And then I also got some questions from the Twitter sphere. So you guys can always get a question answered if you throw it in the live chat, and you can get it prioritized if you do a super chat, but you don't have to do that. So just kind of giving you guys the rundown here. We got Joe Duck here in the live chat, and we're back like we never left. Absolutely. Ruben is here. Another awesome day of Oregon football. And we got Scott Thompson here. Maybe we can do this one to start us off, and then I'll get into some of the ones that I compiled here. Scott Thompson asks, what's up with Bossa, as in Oregon linebacker Jeffrey Bossa? We didn't see a whole lot of Jeffrey Bossa against the Beavers, Justin. What did you make of that?
My guess is probably this. Maybe he's nicked up a little bit in a fashion that probably, like, let's call this, say, this week was a national championship game, and he would probably play, but clearly we haven't seen that, level game. I mean, look, Bassa hasn't been out there, and he's a great player, but I mean, Bryce Beter has been unbelievable. So, I mean, I don't know that there's been any drop off, which is crazy to say. So to answer your question, I think they're just probably being a little bit cautious with him. It's going to likely be a longer than expected season. There's a lot of football left. Heck, they could probably get by just fine with Devin Jackson and Bryce Beter the next two games. I guess the next 3 weeks, but next 2 games if they needed to. The linebacker play has been phenomenal. It really has.
I think I saw someone mention this on the boards the other day, or maybe it was yesterday, about maybe seeing Boss's ankles or feet, legs taped up pretty heavily in that Oregon State game. So maybe it was just some kind of nagging injury that he's dealing with. And if you're this Oregon staff, you're not going to force him to play more than you need to, especially when, like you said, Justin, the other linebackers on the team have been playing some great ball. I think that's another discussion point that we can maybe hit on at some point today. The stars of the show were expected to be Jeffrey Bossa and Justin Jacobs, but right now it's been Bryce Beter and Devin Jackson, who have just been absolutely phenomenal through 3 weeks here in the 2024 season. So good to kind of just hit on some of these live chats here to get us going some more. Zach King, go Ducks. What's going on, Zach? Thank you for being here. Tyler with a quick question. We saw a big improvement Is there more jumps to make or just fine at this point? I think that's a great way to kind of kick off this bye week, Justin, is we have 3 games to analyze, 3-game sample size. And we did see a pretty big improvement from week 2 to week 3 from Oregon, given that they hardly beat Boise State at home. And then you go on the road here to a hostile environment in Reser Stadium, and you're able to take care of business 49-14 over the Beavers. So what do you make of it?
Yeah, I think, I think that when it comes to football at this level, you're kind of working in phases. And so, what I mean by that, and we'll just look at Oregon's schedule the way it's built this year. I think, phase one, we have seen that they have done a really good job and committed to getting, some of these guys that maybe we weren't expecting more reps. Becher and Devin Jackson come to mind immediately. We've seen a heavy rotation at cornerback. Saw some of the younger receivers, obviously in the game on Saturday in Corvallis, Justice Lowe being one of them. So, I think that that's kind of phase one where you have to get your starting unit, your starters. You throw this much at them and have them get really good at it, right? You don't throw them this much and expect them to take it all in. It's too much. So, from a defensive and offensive standpoint, the playbook's this big right now on both sides of the ball. And you want to fine tune, hey, these are our core things. We've got to be good at these. We've got to hit on them. And so now I think what you're looking to do is get that consistency, which, hopefully we can see from week in and week out now. But you just kind of keep building that catalog at this point moving forward. So is there a huge jump? I would not say that there's a huge jump ahead. I think we'll just incrementally see them adding things into the offensive playbook, the defensive playbook, making sure they get good at those things. Probably spend a lot of this week, the bye week, getting guys, healthy, getting those things nicked up, like Jeff Basso we were just talking about. We were able to see Matt Bedford just for a little bit on Saturday, but then you take this week to really get him kind of into that next gear, being able to contribute more in the game. So, it shouldn't be a big jump. And I mean, if there's a big jump from what we saw on Saturday, then it's going to be a hell of a football team. But you don't need that. You just need them to stay consistent and then just take those little steps moving forward, adding things on both sides of the ball.
I tend to think that there are still jumps to make, still improvements to make for this team week by week. If you were to ask Dan Lanning, I'm sure he'd get into something along the lines of the growth mindset that he harps on every time he steps to the podium. But he was also asked about Oregon's offense and how this was one of the most efficient outings, most efficient performances that the Ducks have had in his time, and certainly the best offensive showing just in this year for the Ducks in their week 3 game against the Beavers. So I think that even though you had a really good day, Lanning was saying we can be better. We can be better. It was a very blunt response, even though the reporter asking it was like, man, you guys just killed it on offense. But he doesn't want to step into that praise, I think. And that's a good mindset to have at this point here. Let's see what we got here. We got International Language Center. How do you see Oregon's running game going from here on out?
Well, I guess if our takeaway from Saturday is it's pretty clear they trust Jordan James the most, I think. I think it's fair to say that Noah Whittington, I think there's just big play potential every time Noah Whittington touches the ball. It's a different back, right? They're just different guys. I was pleasantly surprised with Jaden Lamar. Obviously, he had the big touchdown. Kind of came in as that third guy off the bench. Jay Harris was out there a little bit too. I know he's getting up to speed. I think the offensive line was the story here, right? And obviously their ability, to block consistently, to not miss assignments, to, be able to get some push for the run game. That was the big story. I thought, and personally, I felt that, Jordan James did a much better job of running north-south and not going east-west as much. I'm certain a byproduct of that was the efficiency of the offensive line too. Obviously, if you got the ball and you're looking forward and you see a hole or you don't see a hole, is obviously going to impact what decision you make there at the line of scrimmage, whether you're going forward or heading to the boundary. So, I mean, the best thing is that was a well-oiled machine. So, when Oregon's hitting in the short game, the short passing game, the long passing game, and the run game, they're dynamic, and we have to give Will Stein a lot of credit for just really having his finger on the pulse and kind of keeping Oregon State's defense off balance, not really knowing what to expect, and doing a good job with down and distance, meaning, they were able to pick up positive yards on first down, second down, and oftentimes not even getting a third down, but if they were on third down, they kept it manageable most of the time.
It was a great game for Will Stein from a play calling standpoint, and Lanning shouted him out in the post game, and deservedly so. Justin, I wrote a pregame story heading into this game, Oregon's 3 offensive keys, and what was my first key? Establish the run, and that is exactly what the Ducks did, to the tune of 240 yards on the ground, 4 rushing touchdowns. You had Jordan James, who had a pair, I believe, and then you also had Noah Whittington and Dylan Gabriel even got involved in the run game. And the Ducks averaged 7.5 yards a carry, which crazy number. I don't know if that's sustainable long-term over the season, but man, what a showing on the ground for these Oregon backs with Rashad Samples. And then obviously that all got started with the offensive line. And I could have said in my first key, block better, but that's just kind of assumed. You want to bounce back and have that good of a performance. And because the offensive line was able to move the line of scrimmage, pave the way, open some holes for Jordan James, they were able to establish the run, and that just trickled down and opened up the rest of the offense, which is exactly what you wanted to see. So from here on out, I think I'm expecting Oregon's rushing attack to be what it was for much of last year. I think it's definitely doable. You still have a couple games to kind of get tuned up before you welcome the Buckeyes to town on October 12th. So I think the expectation for me is probably going to be like 150 rushing yards a game, Justin. I think anything under that, and you're not panicking, but it's just a little bit below expectation for what you've been able to see from Oregon.
Yeah, I think the difference here is moving forward, at least, if the offensive line continues the level of play that we saw on Saturday. Okay, the biggest difference there to me was the fact that because the offensive line started holding up well, whether it was pass rush or whatever, run blocking, and, now, like Oregon State, for example, wasn't able to just stack the box, right? Because that's what Idaho figured out. That's what Boise State figured out as the game went on. You could see they had everybody within a 7-yard window for a lot of the game. There wasn't very much, and so when those guys are up, there's not many run lanes. And so obviously, them giving Dylan Gabriel time and being able to push these guys back and open up the box obviously helps the run game tremendously. So, I'm like you, Oregon, I still don't know what Oregon's identity is on offense. And not that, obviously that was kind of a bad thing the first 2 weeks. It wasn't bad this last week. I think, kind of figuring out their identity, if they want to be a run-based team or if they like being balanced, which is probably what I would imagine Dan Lanning says. But you still got to run the ball effectively. You're not going to just sit there and dink and dunk your way down the field against Ohio State and, some of the better teams out there. You can get away with it against Boise State or an Idaho or an Oregon State and be okay. But, Oregon's going to need that balanced attack that we saw. They need to establish the run, which we saw against Oregon State, and they will have to have that against the Michigan States and the Ohio States and the better teams in the conference.
All right. Well, hey, we're rocking and rolling here on a Monday morning. Max Torres and Justin Hopkins of Scoop Duck on 3. Glad to have you guys along. Thank you for being with us here on our Monday Oregon football mailbag. Justin, we got to some of the questions in the live chat, but what do you say we switch it over to our lovely subscribers over at Scoop Duck and dive into that bag of mail for a couple of our next topics here. First question from Scoop Duck comes from Text Duck. Regarding our next opponent, is UCLA better than Oregon State? They looked awful at home on Saturday against Indiana team. Sorry, I chopped out a little bit there. I think I'm all right. Don't fail me now, internet. Come on. So asking about UCLA, are they better than Oregon State? I tend to think so. They're definitely a program that is a little bit better resourced, I think, at this point, especially given the Big Ten move than Oregon State. But man, yeah, it was a rough game for UCLA against Indiana. They lost 42-13 on their home turf in Deshaun Foster's first home game, I want to say it was. I think they opened against Hawaii on the road. And it was a rough day God, I mean, if I look at the box numbers here, Justin, they weren't even able to get 100 yards on the ground. You had TJ Harden leading the way with 48 yards and a touchdown. And Ethan Garber's only racked up 137 yards, threw a pick, lost a fumble as well. So just kind of a sloppy day from the Bruins. I think you would probably expect a step up from Oregon State just in terms of a talent composition, but nothing too much from my 2 cents. I got to watch some film though.
Yeah, I think if we're just talking pure talent standpoint, they probably have what I would say is maybe a slight edge over Oregon State, maybe a moderate edge. But I think if you look at how well coached they are, I think Oregon State's really well coached. I think they honestly did play some pretty disciplined football at the end of the day. On offense, they were very disciplined and did a really good job. Obviously Oregon did what I said they needed to do, which was take away the run. And you could see when Oregon did that, that's when the game totally got away from Oregon State, made them one-dimensional. I don't know what UCLA's identity on offense is. I'm pretty sure they don't know what it is either. I think on a neutral field, I think Oregon State would beat UCLA. I don't know if the two play each other. I doubt it this year. I keep forgetting they're not in the same conference now. Totally, you know what I mean? So they don't play each other this year. I think Oregon State would probably beat UCLA by a little bit, regardless of where it's at. You got to keep this in mind, though. We've got to keep this in mind, okay? Oregon, just like Ohio State, Texas, whatever, Oregon is going to be pretty much whoever they play Super Bowl, right? So Deshaun Foster and UCLA, what's the best thing they could do this year? It's beat Oregon, right? They could beat Oregon and beat USC, and they could have those 2 wins alone and probably be happy with the year. So you'll probably get, UCLA's best effort. But that said, I'm far more concerned about Michigan State than I am UCLA.
Fair enough. And of course, that game against Michigan State will be Oregon's first game against Jonathan Smith, the former Oregon State head coach, who was relatively quick to pack up shop and pack his bags and head on over to East Lansing to head up the Spartans program. But that's a good question to get us started. I appreciate that one. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. So with that being said, we roll along. Next question is from Paul.nza on Scoop Duck, who's a big Bryce Beter fan, Justin. And after that last game, I think I am as well. But question is, could Bryce Beter play himself into the NFL draft? So far, he's a very comfortable first place in both solo and total tackles and tied for second in PBUs. Man, that'd be an interesting prospect if he could play himself into the NFL draft after getting selected in the MLB draft before the start of this season. I think it was by the Astros, I want to say. I know it was some Texas team, but that'd be something else if he could play himself into the NFL draft. I think if he continues producing at this rate, I wouldn't rule it out. I don't think he's necessarily going to be a top linebacker prospect just because maybe a little bit of his build is kind of something that stands out to me. And I'm curious how he would test out at the combine athletically. But Bryce Beter is on a tear, and I wouldn't rule it out, him playing himself into the NFL draft.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I think, if you're Oregon, you now get the benefit of, having some of these NFL guys on your roster and them looking at you a little bit harder. Obviously coaches know that Dan Lanning's a defensive coach. So if he's playing Beter over other guys, there must be something to it. I think he could. It's going to be a late round thing if he does. It's 5th, 6th, 7th round, something like that. But, he's been an absolute bright spot. I'm a massive fan. And, Bryce Beter is something that we need to remember this, okay? He's a kid that obviously is from the state of Oregon, and those are the type of kids that when the Civil War comes around, they play with a little bit more hair, a little bit more fire under their ass, right? And so, Bryce Beter is a perfect example of a guy who probably went into that game with, hey, this is the Civil War. This freaking game matters to me, right? And hopefully that translated over into the rest of the locker room because you could see the way he played on Saturday that certainly felt like a game that mattered to him. He's had a great season so far, but really on Saturday he was an absolute nightmare for Oregon State. So super pumped about him. Glad he's a Duck. Obviously, the kid's a hell of an athlete because you don't play two sports at this level without being, pretty athletic. And, I do continue to believe this. I think that there is a pretty big role for these athletic linebackers in the NFL because, as we know, the NFL is going to more of a passing league, week in and week out. So having these guys that are able to cover space as a linebacker and not be washed out, in the run game, there's a premium for those guys in the NFL right now. So yeah, I could totally see him playing his way in.
You absolutely love a linebacker that can cover in the pass game. And that's what Bryce Beter did this past weekend. I think he had 2 or 3 pass breakups. Dude was just all over the field, Justin. And I think he mentioned in his post-game presser that he's only missed 3 Civil War matchups since he was like 5 years old. So to your point, a game that obviously carries tremendous importance to him throughout his entire life. Rolling along here, I'm going to see if I can type up some of these questions as we go. Make sure you guys know what's going on. This question is from Duck541 on Scoop Duck, who says, we're a few weeks into high school ball. Any potentially fast rising seniors the Duck staff has their eyes on? And that's a good question. I think it is a good question. The one that comes to mind for me, and we haven't seen a whole lot of traction with other seniors, just the 2025 board seems like it's very established at this point in time, Justin. But Austin Simmons, I'm still trying to get an update on him. I exchanged a couple texts with him, but wasn't able to get anything back. He is a 2025 Washington State tight end commit who is from West Albany, Oregon. So I think that he is someone who could continue putting himself onto, I guess, more radars, obviously, with a good season, but certainly could strengthen his appeal for Oregon with a strong year. And we know that Oregon's tight end recruiting has been a bit of a struggle this cycle. And Vander Plug is another one that is a little bit of a later riser, in my opinion. I've seen him a bunch of times, I should say, down here in SoCal. He's a 2025 tight end that's committed to Washington out of Troy High School in Fullerton. But he is someone that doesn't have that national spotlight on him, or I guess he's getting it now. He got Oregon and Bama and other schools on him. He doesn't play in a really big league, so I think that's why he's kind of gone under the radar. But he's a 3-sport athlete: football, basketball, baseball, and I think he's got to be one of the big 25 guys that I have my eye on, at least down here in SoCal in my backyard.
Yeah, just not a ton of them to answer the question directly. And I think there's a few things in play for that. First off, for Oregon, I'll say it again. I think Dan Lanning's pretty much just kind of big game hunting at this point, trying to fill out the rest of his class, with the exception of maybe, the tight ends that we're talking about because they don't have a commit there, and there is a need. But otherwise, it's big game hunting. Secondly is this. I think the evolution of scouting, of recruiting has come, a long ways, right? So you used to get those senior risers because, film was slow to get out. There wasn't, it wasn't Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, not that long ago. And so now with kind of the evolution of this thing, it's pretty hard to go unnoticed, right? I mean, it's really hard. So, Oregon's got a really big recruiting staff, that does a good job making sure they're on all these guys as well. So yeah, there's going to be less and less of that. It's not like it won't ever happen. But there's going to be less of that, especially with the satellite camps and stuff now too. So nobody to me, I mean, Vander Plug's the guy that we'd already talked about in the spring, took a visit and stuff. So, I mean, yeah, maybe he's moved up the board a little bit, but it's not like he was a complete unheard of. Austin Simmons is, but still kind of has yet to get the offer and get Oregon kind of pushing real hard there. So we'll see what transpires. So, right now it's quiet, but again, I mean, there's high schools that have only played 1 or 2 games. So, let's check back on this again in 3 or 4 weeks and see if there's any movement. But I would be real surprised if there's many, given the way Oregon's recruiting and the evolution of scouting as well.
Wanted to spotlight a comment here from our guy, Bud Everts. Hopefully I'm saying that right, Bud. He's a San Jose native, I believe, Las Gatos, if I remember correctly. So he's been a very big supporter for a long time of the show. And he says, everyone, please like this episode to support Max and Justin and subscribe if you haven't already. So couldn't have said it better myself, Bud. I always love it when you guys show support and, do some of that marketing for us. I definitely appreciate you being here, Bud. Thank you so much. One more question from our Scoop Duck subscribers, Justin. This one comes from T-Bone on Scoop Duck, who says, bye-week recruiting schedule. Gotta assume some games will be attended Friday. I think you're spot on with this question, T-Bone. With Oregon's bye week, I think the coaches are going to hit the road, check in on some of their top commits, and look at some of their top targets. And I think that's an interesting question that we could ask within this question, Justin. If you're Dan Lanning and this Oregon recruiting staff, do you think it is more important to check on your commitments right now, or really put the pedal to the metal and check on some of these committed targets that are, or targets that are committed to other schools, given how we've seen some ebbs and flows in this cycle? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's why Dan Lanning makes the big bucks. I mean, it's a tough decision to make, right? Obviously, DeCorian Moore, Dallas Wilson, Dorian Brew, those guys come to mind. Those are the guys that you're looking, to hold on to dearly in this class. But there's a lot of other guys so it's going to be based on, where Oregon can get. You have games there are some games that are played Thursday. It's not often, but it does happen. Obviously, Friday is a big night. We know Friday Night Lights, and occasionally there's a game on Saturday here and there. So, I would imagine, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you can also get to, practice, and that allows you some time to kind of sit there and chat with them maybe a little bit and just do some of that stuff as well. So, I think that you'll hear about the staff getting going on the road. They'll probably do it kind of in waves. You'll get, 3 or 4 coaches out, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and, 3 or 4 coaches out, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because they're still training this week. You don't take the week off from football, so you can't just send everybody on the road. And then obviously this weekend, the Ducks don't play on Saturday, so they'll probably work on doing some of that as well. So, and we'll get some updates on that. We'll get it posted on Scoop Duck. We'll try to find out where some of these coaches are, and I'm sure that we'll also see posts on social media of, hey, thanks, coach, blah, 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 for coming by or whatever. So, yeah, that's going to happen this week for sure.
And you would think that this extra bye week is going to benefit Oregon, not just from on the field. I know we talked yesterday, Justin, how it felt like Oregon needed a bye in the worst possible way heading into that Oregon State game. But I think you're in a much better spot now that you captured some of that momentum that you really needed in Corvallis. And now you can work with the luxury, I guess you could say, of having this extra bye week to hit the road and go check out some of these top prospects. We know that at least from a media standpoint, I think Lanning's supposed to talk on Wednesday, usually talks on Monday nights. So that's a little change in the regularly scheduled programming. But I definitely think that we're going to see some recruiting ramp up this week. And I know I'm going to try to get some more interviews over on the site to keep you guys up to date on the latest in Oregon's recruiting efforts in the 2025, 2026, 2027 classes. Before we get any further, Justin, want to give a quick shout out to one of our sponsors here on the channel, and that is Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your guys' dinner plans are tonight, but head on over to Ranchito Grill at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. Try their homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy Ruben and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Max Torres and Justin Hopkins of Scoop Duck on 3 here with you on a Monday morning, rolling right along on our Oregon football mailbag. We do this every Monday. Let's dive into some Twitter questions, Justin. This one comes from Kayla84745 with an interesting one. They ask, surprise contributors / non-contributors on offense and defense through the first 3 games. # Ducks Dish. What are you thinking here?
So surprise contributors so far, is that, or moving forward?
Through 3 games, kind of what we've seen, people that you're surprised you've seen contributed as much as they have, or maybe that haven't been contributing.
We've already talked about Beter, right? And there's no need to go. I mean, absolute bright spot. Devin Jackson right next to him, been almost as big of a bright spot. I think folks have really taken for granted the second cornerback on the team. Obviously, we know Jabbar Muhammad is where he's at, but we've seen Nico Reed have some big plays. We've seen Dante Manning play at the highest level we've seen from him at Oregon so far. Obviously, Brandon Johnson wasn't as big on this past Saturday in the Civil War, but the first 2 games before that, he came up clutch. super big bright spot there. We kind of knew about Kenyon Sadiq, right? We knew that was going to be a guy on offense. They've clearly tried to get him the football. Evan Stewart was kind of expected, but you still didn't know because his results at Texas A&M so far had been mixed. He's clearly a big play threat for Oregon on offense. I guess that's it. I mean, Atticus Sappington was a great addition. I know he missed the one field goal in the first game, but outside of that, he's been clutch for the most part. And the special, I guess, really, the surprise contributor in general to me has been the special teams. Just in general, they've been good. Yeah, and that's a multiple phase element there. We haven't seen a dropped punt. We haven't seen a dropped kickoff return or anything yet. The kickoffs have been good. The punts have been good. The field goals, obviously, just the one that we've missed so far. I think Oregon's missed 1 point after attempt too, but otherwise, pretty damn solid. So, special teams, Betcher, Devin Jackson, Brandon Johnson. Not much on offense, I guess. I guess it feels like we kind of knew they were known quantities on offense, it felt like.
Sure. I think if you had to go anywhere on offense for a surprise contributor, maybe you'd say Nishad Strother or Charlie Pickard at their various times. It looks like the Ducks made a change along that starting line and slotted in Strother at that left guard spot, kicked Marcus Harper over to the right side of the offensive line. I know that Strother said he's more comfortable on the left, but one contributor on defense that I think has been a little bit of surprise for some people, not necessarily myself, because I talked about this, I remember on a show with Spencer McLaughlin. How about a Marion Winston? He's been a pretty consistent face out there on that front seven for the Ducks, and just staying there, I think you could go a little bit of a surprise, a little bit of a non-surprise. I keep trying to think of how to word this, Justin, but we've seen a decent amount of Jaden Moore, and we haven't seen very much of Blake Purchase, which I think has been one of the early surprises so far this season, because Purchase had a really strong, true freshman season. We were thinking about Mateo, Blake Purchase, and Tatum Tuote. That was the trio of the edge rushers that they signed in the 23 class. And after having a pretty significant role, not a starter by any means, but Blake Purchase in 2023 had a pretty significant role. Haven't seen too much of him so far through 3 games. And I think the same would be said about Cam Alexander, the UTSA cornerback transfer. He was someone that I think a lot of us, myself included, were expecting to see very heavily involved at cornerback. But maybe that's because the Ducks haven't really had to kind of chip into that depth at corner, because Jabbar Muhammad, Nico Reed, and Dante Manning have been doing a really solid job early on here. Yeah.
And, it's interesting. I just looked and I had to look. Obviously, as far as this bye goes, it's an early bye, and it's nice on the recruiting front, because I think, the staff being able to get on the road this week, really kind of going out there and figuring out, okay, we got a legit shot here. We don't have a legit shot here. All that kind of stuff. That's really good. You got to keep in mind now, okay, they're about to play 8 games in a row before they get their next bye. Oregon is, right? So health, injuries are paramount now, right? I mean, that's probably, if you're the staff, you're looking at that at the beginning of the season, like, hey, we can get through those first 3 games and be 3-0 by any metric. I don't care if it's all by 1 point wins, just be 3-0 and relatively healthy. And then if you've got a guy like Justin Jacobs or Dave Iuli or possibly Cam Alexander, if you've got guys that are nicked up a little bit, like, okay, let's try to use them sparingly, try to get through. We've got the depth, get to 3-0, get that bye. And then, you've got a grueling 8 weeks in a row without a bye coming up. So you've got some tough games in there. You've got some, big road games that you're going to travel to new stadiums, and you're going to get everybody's best shot. So, keep in mind, I think some of those guys were being limited because the staff's looking at the big picture here and knowing this is going to be a really difficult 8 weeks starting next week with UCLA.
Very good point. We have that bye that is a little bit unusual for the Ducks, but that of course comes on the heels of the Big Ten conference move. So kind of had to make those adjustments to fit that all in. Next question here in our mailbag comes from Wink on Twitter, who asks, is it time to lose faith in Dicky? It appears that he didn't see a single snap against Oregon State. Is Pelham the 5th wide receiver on the depth chart, or at least battling with Lowe for the 5th? I think I'll tackle this one, Justin. I don't think it's necessarily time to lose faith, I wouldn't say, but it is strange that for all the raving that there was about him in the offseason, I think back to Will Stein in the week leading up to the Fiesta Bowl, I think it was, he was talking about how he's just changed his body dramatically. He's taken the ball off of a defender's heads. Like when I heard that, I was like, okay, this guy is a playmaker, and he is certainly someone that we're going to see more of. He had the change from number 99 to number 13, which is what he wore in high school. So on the surface, at least, I actually have a plan to make a call today to kind of get a little bit more on this. On the surface, at least, it seems like Jurion Dicky has everything that he needs to put together, carving out a more significant role. So I don't think I'm necessarily losing faith in Dicky, but I definitely agree that it's shocking that we haven't really seen much of him yet. And when you look at that, you just have to kind of trust the staff and think there's got to be some kind of a reason that they're not seeing him on the field, because we have seen, in contrast, a lot more of Kyler Casper, who's in his 3rd year at Oregon after not seeing too much of him the last 2 seasons. We've seen a bit more of Justice Lowe. And then to this question, Ryan Pelham was out there a little bit. So he's someone who I'm really excited to seeing that he's from Long Beach. But it seems like Pelham and Lowe are kind of battling for that 5th spot, or I guess I would put in Casper. I'm trying to think of this on the fly. You got Tez, you have Trayshawn Holden, you have who else do we have here? Gary Bryant still hasn't played yet, which is interesting. So it's interesting that they haven't really worked in Jurion Dicky so far. So it does feel like Lowe and Pelham are kind of battling in that spot right now.
Yeah, I mean, Lowe's been in the program longer. Makes sense. Also makes sense that we see him on Saturday because it's, again, you're talking about a kid from the state of Oregon who understands the Civil War. And that's, I'm not saying that Lowe's behind him, but anyways, I mean, I think being a kid from Oregon, they, tried to maybe make sure he got out there, at least for his family, if nothing else. And so, Dicky, to me, this is Dicky's freshman year. I think last year, was injured, was overweight, just he wasn't ready. He wasn't taking it serious. Whatever the case might be, he was injured too. To me, this is more of his first year. And, outside of Saturday, Oregon's been in some absolute dogfights. I mean, they haven't had the luxury of playing a lot of the youngsters late in the games, which I think they probably originally hoped to do that. And it hasn't happened. So I'm not going to take too much into it because really that was a 1-game sample size where you had the opportunity to do that. Again, if Dicky continues working hard, he was a 5-star for a reason. But I mean, we've seen guys go into the NFL that, you think have a chance to be a Hall of Famer. And I mean, frankly, if you don't put in the work, it just, the results don't follow. So, Dicky's got to put in the work here at Oregon. We'll see how the rest of the season goes. As for Pelham, as for Bryant, any of those freshmen, I didn't expect to see any of the freshmen in meaningful snaps this year. I mean, I thought it was going to be pretty hard for them to pass up Casper and Lowe, who already have 2-3 years, whatever, on them in the program, already know the terminology, have, just up to speed with the college game. So I wouldn't take much of anything away from the young receivers not playing because Tez Johnson's one of the best receivers in the country. Evan Stewart's probably one of the best, big game potential guys. And Trayshawn Holden, I mean, this is his 2nd year as a transfer coming from Bama. I mean, the dude knows ball. So, I mean, it was always going to be tough for those guys to beat those 3 out.
It's an uphill battle for sure for Jurion, and I'm not losing faith in him in the least, especially with the point that you just said, Justin. This is the first time they actually had a chance to work him in, given the fact that they played 2 very close games that were supposed to be blowouts, or at least one of them was. Let's do one more question today. This one's a little bit longer, so I don't have the characters on StreamYard to get it all in there, but we'll tackle it nonetheless. Question from Tyler Harrell on Twitter. Tyler asks, with the main emphasis of recruiting being defensive line under Dan Lanning and Tosh Lapoy, the D line seems to be playing a lot of patty cake at times and don't seem and you don't see them being disruptive like we would expect. Do you guys see this as scheme related? You want to tackle this one to start, Justin?
Sure. I don't know. I don't know. It's an interesting question. Not really something I've thought about. I personally have been pleased with the defensive line in every game, and I know some people see it differently. But I mean, Derek Harmon's the guy we probably should have talked about being a bright spot or a surprise or whatever, because the dude's a wall. Like, he's absolutely insane as an interior defensive lineman. So I don't see this per se. I think the defense has been put in a lot of bad positions because of the poor offensive play in the first two games, obviously not on Saturday. So if you're going by, yards or points or whatever, I've never felt worried about the defense in any of the games so far this year at any point. I could see the talent. You can see that at defensive line, they're rotating, bringing guys in, and they've got depth. I just think that they've been put in a lot of unfortunate positions, and they are a bit susceptible to big plays. That's been the one thing that's kind of gotten them, has been, the scrambling play by McCoy and the flea flicker from Idaho in the first game, like, the Ashton Genty 70-yarder. I mean, if you can remove, which I understand it's part of the game, but if you can remove some of those big plays, the defense has played really well. So I don't see that personally.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it myself. I think with what you said about the offensive struggles the first couple of weeks, the defense was just out there a lot more, so they weren't as fresh as I think the staff would probably like. You definitely see bright spots like a Derek Harmon for sure. He's been phenomenal since coming over from Michigan State. I think Jamari Caldwell, for whatever reason, last week was the week when I saw him play, and I'm like, geez, this guy is just massive in the trenches. We got to see some more of Amari Washington last week against Oregon State. So those guys are I think, gelling, and you're seeing that rotation have a lot of effect. Tatum Tuote, I think, has been one of the other bright spots. And I'm curious as the season goes, Justin, how we are going to address this conversation or manage the conversation when comparing Tatum and Mateo, because they are different players. They are different builds physically, but they both came in the same class. Mateo from St. John Bosco, Tatum Tuote from Sheldon in Eugene. He definitely didn't come with the acclaim and hype that Mateo did, but he is having a tremendous year, really changed his body, put on some great weight, and he's one of my standouts for sure, Tatum Tuote. So I don't think it's scheme related necessarily, the lack of disruption that fan Tyler has seen. I think part of it too has just been the offensive philosophies of both of these two recent opponents. Boise State and Oregon State ran the hell out of the ball, and I think that has resulted in not as many opportunities for sacks or TFLs or pressures. So I think I still have a lot of faith in that Oregon D-line and what they're going to be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's the bigger point there, is just, how many of these teams are dropping back and throwing the ball? It's not happening. And then, to boot, the one team that started to, when Oregon State started losing, they started dropping back and throwing the ball. McCoy's really elusive. Like, he's really fast. He can move. He can run. So, yeah, if they can get, like, for instance, I think Oregon will have a better chance doing that against Ohio State, because their quarterback's not as mobile. So I guess we'll kind of see what happens there. And Michigan State, their quarterback's pretty mobile too. So, I imagine you won't see the numbers, but they're absolutely rigid against the run game. And honestly, that's the most important thing right there.
There you go. Well, hey, it's been awesome having you guys along for another edition of the Ducks Dish podcast for a Monday mailbag edition. If you guys want to find more of Justin, you can follow him on Twitter at JHopkinsSD. You can find me on any platform at MTorresSports. Subscribe to the Scoop Duck on 3 YouTube channel. Maybe you take it a step further and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on live streams featuring Justin, myself, and maybe some guests moving forward. We're working on that as well, trying to get some more guests on the show. And then come see us at scoopduck.com. Check us out for the best in Oregon football and recruiting. And then lastly, make sure you share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. But have a great week, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.